Hey, and welcome back. In the last episode, we talked about the state of the workforce results, and it wasn't very bright, stating that people were feeling more lonely and sad than ever before in the workplace. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on the leadership of organizations and see what this report has to say about them. Also, we're going to take a close look at the role of leaders and managers in the workforce and the impact it has on the workers' well-being and overall organizational performance.
This is Tim Staten with Tim Stating the Obvious. What is this podcast about? It's simple. You are entitled to great leadership everywhere you go, whether it's to church, whether it's to work, whether it's at your house, you are entitled to great leadership. And so in this podcast, we take leadership principles and theories and turn them into everyday, relatable, and usable advice.
And a quick disclaimer, this show, process, or service by trademark manufacturer, or otherwise does not necessarily constitute an implied endorsement of anyone that I am employed by or favors them in representation. The views are expressed here in my show are my own expressed and do not necessarily state or reflect those of any employer.
Guess what? Managers are about 18% more engaged and 40% reported that they are thriving in life. They also report that they are more stressed, angry, sad, lonely, and worry more than non-managers. But this makes sense to me. I mean, leadership and managers of organizations typically make more financially compared to non-managers, so their social status and quality of life is a little bit higher. When they contribute at work, they feel like their opinions matter and become more connected to the organization because they have that meaningful interaction and exchange of words, the back and forth of everything. And, when they say something, they feel like it is heard because they are the leaders and the managers of the organization. Leaders often rely on each other in the organization for support and help, and this aids in being a sense of belonging and a more sense of human connectedness. And this can contribute to the thriving and engagement reporting. However, the flip side of these roles is that leaders often find themselves under great emotional strain, even though higher pay and leadership titles come with the prestige, but they also come with a significantly heightened responsibilities, demands, and performance and expectations of them. Leaders, particularly empathetic ones, face the constant pressure to meet not only their own goals, but the goals of the organization that they serve and their team. This can lead to increased feeling of stress, anger, sadness, loneliness, and worry. The nature of leadership often involves separating one's personal needs from the needs of the employees and the organization. There's a delicate balancing act that can be emotionally taxing on people. Great leaders are not only just decision makers, they're also emotional anchors for their teams. They can provide critical support. They offer guidance and help employees access the appropriate resources when they need assistance. But this role as the emotional backbone of an organization can take a significant toll on a leader's own mental and emotional health. Leaders frequently take on emotional burdens of their team members, practicing empathy in an effort to understand and support them. However, when leaders slip into sympathy, absorbing the emotional pain of others rather than maintaining a healthy level of detachment, they risk becoming emotionally overwhelmed themselves. While empathy is a crucial trait for effective leadership, an excessive emotional load can lead to burnout, exhaustion, and diminished capacity to lead effectively. What often gets overlooked in discussion of leadership is that leaders, too, are human beings with emotional needs. The constant focus on well-being of others can sometimes lead to neglect of their own well-being. Leaders must not only provide the emotional and professional needs of their teams, but also find the time to tend to their own mental and emotional health. Ignoring this self-care can have long-term consequences for both the leader and the organization as a whole. It is essential that organizations recognize the emotional demands placed on leaders and provide the necessary support systems to ensure their well-being. This can include offering mental health resources, encouraging leaders to take breaks, fostering peer support among leadership, and promoting an organizational culture where leaders are not afraid to express vulnerability. Now, this can be very, very tricky to do. If people feel like they can't be vulnerable at work, and I would say most people feel like they cannot be vulnerable at work. This is something that we all need to work on. People need to be okay and to feel like they're supported enough if they have the gumption, the intestinal fortitude to come forward, Say, hey, boss, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. I need help. Or, hey, boss, I need help with X, Y, and Z. Or, hey, boss, I need these assistive devices to help me do my job better. I know I don't want to admit or let you know that I have something cognitively that I struggle with, but these assistive devices help me do better. So that right there is an ability to allow that person to be vulnerable enough to admit that, so then you can provide the resources that they need. And that's hard. And even amongst leaders, we don't want to admit weakness to each other, but sometimes we need to. Sometimes we need to be like, hey, look, I need help with this one area. I'm struggling with it. I don't know I don't know how to figure this out. Or, hey, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. Can you help me out with it? So it's very important to lean on each other. Leaders should not be expected to shoulder the emotional burdens of their teams alone. And creating a culture that values emotional well-being at every level can lead to healthier and more resilient organizations. And it's great that we're talking about all this, touchy-feely stuff. And I know some people are like, oh, this is very emotional. This is very sentimental. This is very pie in the sky type stuff. There's nothing really concrete that we're talking about in the last 2 episodes other than people's feelings. However, it's important to recognize that we are all people. We're all connected and we're all people. But what does that really mean? And how does it correlate to the workplace? Well, let me just say that there's a direct correlation, people who experience a lot of daily enjoyment, and it's associated with people who have higher engagement in the workforce. This suggests that a job, when it is good, meaningful, and interesting, adds something positive to a person's life, and that's significant. And we're going to talk about here in just a second how you as leaders have a direct impact on that. Now, with employee engagement being around 33% in North America, which is higher than the other engagement groups around the world, this study found that leaders and managers have a profound effect on increasing this number even higher. When a leader is engaged in the workplace, studies found that employee engagement can be raised to around 70%. This means that for every 14 engaged employees, there is only one actively engaged employee, which is 11 times higher than the average. The hope is that leaders and managers are more engaged in the workplace. Then this means that they can profoundly increase employees' engagement of their organization. Meaning, if you as a leader, you're more engaged in the workforce, your workers are going to be more engaged in the workforce, and your engagement levels are going to go through the roof, which means you're going to have better customer service, better productivity, better goals, better objectives, and overall more money for your organization. That's how this works. But if you're like, I don't know how to do that, well, leaders, we can help drive engagement up through a myriad of ways. We can goal set. We can set key objectives and milestones coupled with regular and meaningful feedback sessions. And let's not forget that we have to hold people accountable, which is key. We have to hold our teams accountable and we have to hold ourselves accountable. Today's workforce has been marred by widespread disruptions, which include, declines in employee engagement, decline in well-being, a record number of turnover and hiring rates, and an unprecedented increase in hybrid workforce. We've never been more in the workplace and out of the workplace or more remote than we've ever been before because of increase in technology and the ability to do so. Also, COVID kind of brought a little light on, do I really need to be in the workplace or can I work remotely? And businesses capitalize on that. I don't have to pay as much overhead because people can just work from home. And ultimately, it's the leader's job to bring stability to disruption and lead their teams into the future. These responsibilities have never been more demanding than before. As a result, leaders' own employee engagement and overall satisfaction have substantially declined, and their intent to leave has also increased. So what we're finding is that people in employee engagement it's still on decline. Leaders are not as engaged as they used to be, and they're not satisfied as they used to be. And their intent to leave from one company to go to another, thinking it's going to be better somewhere else, when guess what? You're the leader. You're responsible for the culture of your organization. You are generating what's around you. You are completely responsible for that. And I'm going to argue that it's because leaders and managers at various levels are not as engaged as they could be. The organizations that are getting it right, those have higher engagement levels and retention rates higher than those that aren't. I mean, let's face it, as a leader, if you're 100% telework and your team is 80-20, so 80% at home, 20% in the office, or 75-25, right? 75% home, 25% in the office, or even 60-40 or 40-60. You as the leader are not as engaged as you could be, and the appearance is that you're not as engaged as you should be because you're not there when they are. And your team is feeling it, and that's why your culture is eroding, and that's why people are leaving. Calling people to check in on them or doing a Slack or Teams chat to get a status update, isn't really cutting it. People need real human action and know that you have more skin in the game than they do. They need to feel like their leaders care more about things than they do, and that drives them to care more. Because why should they get paid less to do more and perform higher when you aren't even holding up your end of the bargain as a leader either? You're not willing to do it. You're not willing to work more for higher pay. So that's just food for thought. So as we kind of wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with this in mind. The studies and the numbers show that leaders are better off and thriving more than non-leaders. That's just a fact. And yes, we all want higher engagement at work, but we're not willing to put the work and the effort into it to get people to be more engaged. And that's what the numbers show. The numbers show that we complain about employee engagement and we want to know how to do it, and we spend a whole bunch of money about going about doing it. But when the simple fact is if you just have better leaders that are more engaged in the workplace, you have people who care more about other people in the workplace than they do about anything else, then your people are going to be more engaged. So I'm going to offer this up to you. What are you willing to do as a leader to have a profound impact on your organization? What goals are you going to set? What milestones and objectives are you going to set to hold yourself accountable and your teams accountable? And are you even having meaningful feedback sessions with your team, with your people, with your organization? That way you can hold yourself and them accountable for what they say they're going to do. And these are simple things, right? Everything sounds simple, but application of this is incredibly hard because it implies effort. I'm reminded of something that happened just recently the last 2 weeks, and I've been meaning to do something and it's been on my mind about it. And I know I needed to do it. I've been putting it off, and I was putting it off because of putting everything else more important. And then we had a difficult conversation that needed to be had. However, had I not provided that meaningful impact, that meaningful feedback to somebody on the positive and the negatives, then there would be no improvement. There would be no growth. And then either things are going to continue to go the way they're going, or things are going to continue to get worse. And it's only going to escalate until it explodes, which is good for nobody. So if you're a leader, you got to think about it. Are you really doing the things that you need to do and putting in the work and putting in the effort and showing people that you have more skin in the game than they do? Or are you going to continue to complain that you're not getting as much engagement as you want and it's everybody else's fault and not look at the mirror? Simple things, just as showing up, is important. Simple things, just as talking to people, is important. Simple things as looking at something that somebody's working on and providing real-time feedback is important, and not just criticism, but real feedback. So I want you to think about that. And then the other thing is that if you're a leader out there and you hear this and you know what, I'm actually doing it right, I'm knocking it out of the park, why don't you share your story? You can do that a couple of ways. You can either go on our Facebook group and type in Tim Stating the Obvious and share your story there, or you can go to timstatingtheobvious.com and send me an email, send me your story, and I'll highlight that on a future episode. Every story that you send me, I will highlight who it is, where they're from, and the story of how they're knocking it out of the park. So that way you can then glean some, nuggets of gold from that and make, I could replicate that. I could do that. Let me see if that's going to work in my organization. So just kind of want to leave that there with you as we wrap up this episode. As always, thank you for stopping by and listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. Before we go, I'd like to ask a favor of you, if I could. If you could please share this episode with one or two people who you think might like this topic. If you haven't followed or subscribed this episode on whatever platform you're listening to it on, and hit all the bells and the whistles and the icons, please do that. So that way when we release another episode. I don't want to waste your time with you coming back and looking for it. Every other week we release an episode. If you got some value out of this episode, please leave a review or a comment so we can help spread the show with other people who might be interested in the topic but just haven't found our show yet. Again, thanks for stopping by. I'm Tim Staten, Stating the Obvious.